the photos come back from Pixelmob, I take them into my Lightroom Classic and do the little tweaks that I mentioned earlier, add a little bit more depth and bring back a little bit more color, because generally these services tend to favor the bright and white look. And personally, I favor the little bit more natural look. So we'll make those tweaks and then we'll export the photos and upload them to Kasia so we can have a nice home tour. We got our files. So now let's move into Lightroom Classic. And we're gonna do some final touch-ups. This one, synchronize, all right. So I'm just gonna upload all the new photos. Let's see, so we have these photos here. Okay, I'm gonna create a folder in my collections that allows me to process the photos without affecting the originals. It creates a virtual copy of it where I can do non-destructive edits. So I can always go back to the original or any step up in the process if I don't like how they're coming out. All right, so, okay. And we're gonna drop those photos in there. So those are all of these. There you go. Okay, I'm gonna rearrange them to go in order. It helps me visually to do that. So living room, let's go to the thumbnail view. So we got the living room, we're gonna move those up front, living room, kitchen. Then after that, we'll move into the bathroom, the downstairs bathroom. Here. Okay, so that's the downstairs. Then we move upstairs into the primary bedroom, which is nicely staged. It always helps so much to have the house cleared out and staged if possible. Those photos generally come out the best. So we got the bathroom, we got that, and then we got the basement. Okay, and then we have the front or the outside ones. And I usually put a couple front ones in the front. So we'll grab all the front ones. That one. Let's do these. This one we'll leave. This way when people are viewing the photos, it takes them through the natural flow of how they generally look at the house. There we go. So, they show up at the house, they're in the front, they look, they may look at a couple sides of it, but then they go right in. And then after that, after they've toured the house, they move back outside to look at the yard and all that stuff. That's, it's not written in stone. But this is the most common way of viewing a house. So I like to arrange the photos to kind of mimic that tour. And this one's got a little bit of fishbowl effect. So let's go into the develop and let's make me a little smaller and move to the side. Okay, so we can see the panel here. All right, so what I'm gonna do, first thing I wanna do is fix that fishbowl thing. It drives me crazy. Now, this happens more at the very end of the lens. So if my lens is 11 to 16 or 17, 18, or what, I don't even remember, 16. So if I'm at the 11 millimeter end of it, that's where the fishbowl effect is the highest, because it grabs the edges and it distorts them. It usually doesn't happen to this extent. That's why I'm a little bit annoyed with this result, but that's okay. So in Lightroom, if you scroll down in your editing panel down to lens corrections, I go into the manual, check that constraint crop box. So as you're rotating and manipulating the image, if there's any blank spaces around the edges, it's just gonna crop those out automatically. So we're gonna go this way a little bit. So we wanna straighten, see if we go this way, so kind of try and see where the happy medium is. So it looks like it's maybe right about there. It's never gonna be perfect. These are wide angle lenses. They add a little bit of distortion by naturally. If I hit auto, I don't always, in the transform panel, I don't always use the auto because it doesn't always get it right. So I'm gonna use the rotate, and then if I have to, I use the guided, but in this case, I think this is okay. All right, so we did that, and let's make it a little bit brighter. There was quite a bit of shadow there, so we'll make it a little bit brighter, but we'll pull back down the highlights. See, the highlights kind of make the whites washed out. And I'm gonna hit J on my keyboard. So now, if the whites are clipped and the blacks are clipped, you're gonna see these blue for blacks and there's little red dots for white. That means that the blacks are oversaturated. So you wanna bring that back to, you know, just where it's not clipping. So that will produce a nice natural color there. I'm gonna bring that back though for the blacks, but for the whites, it's actually not bad, but I'm still gonna bring back the highlights just a tiny bit. If I increase the whites, this is where you see the clipping. So you don't want to see all the red. That's gonna be washed out, oversaturated. It's not gonna present well, especially if you're printing stuff. You want to watch out for that. So I'm gonna bring those back down to 0. So overall, this is pretty good. When you have a sunny day and the house is surrounded by a lot of trees, you're gonna get all of these shadows, which there's not much you can do about it. So I'm just trying to kind of make it just a little bit brighter so the house isn't so dark. So we'll do that, and then let's see what the dehaze, and that makes it a little less. So we'll leave dehaze as this, clarity. Sometimes I'll bump it up to just a little bit, like 5 or 6. I'll leave it at that. So before, after, it's a little brighter. I like the depth of the before. So what I also like to do sometimes, depending on how the image comes out, up the luminance just a little bit. It makes the image a little bit smoother. It gets rid of any graininess, and then add a little bit of sharpening, generally around 40. I don't go over 40, it starts to look unnatural. And then let's do luminance about 30. So that adds just a little bit of cleanliness to the image and sharpness. So we'll leave it at that. So it's not even the first one, see? So now what I'm gonna do is apply the same effects to the other ones. So I have the first one selected, and I'm gonna select the others, hit sync. I don't want to sync the transform panel. The cropping I do manually because they will all be a bit different. And then also this one here. I'm only syncing the outdoor ones because the indoor ones will have slightly different settings. So let's see here. So this is what the result is before, after. So it fixed a little bit of that fishbowl effect. Now there's still quite a bit of shadow. Again, not much we can do with it. Let me see what happens if I pull up the shadows. It makes it too flat. That's the problem. So we're gonna leave it as is. What I can do, let's try this. Let's select the subject, which is the house. Let's remove that little piece of sky because that is not part of the subject. And let's make that a little bit brighter. There we go. See the house, it'll help the house stand out a little bit from the background. So I just made it a little bit brighter. So now it presents a little bit better. The object select in Lightroom Classic has greatly improved. It does a pretty good job selecting object just based on a selection that isn't exact. All right, so yeah, you see that the house is quite a bit in a shadow just because of all these trees. So we're trying to help it pop. There we go. Up the exposure. Not too much, because if you go too much, it just looks like it's pasted in like in Photoshop. So you want to be mindful of how much you bring out of the shadows. And let me separately up the brightness on the trees. Let's do a linear gradient and subtract the subject. There we go. Now we can play around with just a tree. So we can make them a little bit brighter, but I don't want it to get too flat. Let's add a little bit of contrast to them. So before, after. So it just helps the image pop a little bit. The realtor may not want to use certain images, like in this case, driveway has a lot of cracks in it. So I find that sometimes realtors will skip images like this just to take the focus away from those things. But in either case, you don't want to be manipulating things like this. You don't want to be photoshopping this out, because in that case, it's not accurate. You're not accurately representing the property. And first of all, it's not ethical to change anything about the property that's permanent or that can be fixed, but it's, you know, it's in a state like this. You could get yourself in trouble. You could get your real estate client in trouble. So another things to keep in mind too, fireplaces. Be careful adding fire to a fireplace in post-up, in Photoshop, because if it's an actual fireplace, there has been instances where, you know, a house closes, the buyer goes in, they want to start a fireplace, it doesn't work, but you showed a fire in the photos and they can come back and complain about that. So just be mindful of what you're editing. You can clean up things that may or may not be there. For example, if there's a box on a table, you can remove that. The box, that comes and goes. If there's something on the floor that's normally not there, you can clean that up with Photoshop. But anything that's permanently attached to the property, leave that as is, even if it doesn't present itself in a perfect way, like this driveway. So let's take this and then sync it over to these outside photos, so that way they all have the same baseline. We will not do the mask. I'll do the mask separately because it doesn't always translate well. But again, I'm gonna leave off the cropping. I'm gonna do that manually if I need to. So everything else is checked. So let's synchronize that. And then let's take a look at these. So before, after. Again, I'm gonna add a little bit of brightness to the subject. Let's move on to the next one. So in this case, I am going to Photoshop these cars up. This is the street, and there's trees on the other side. So obviously the cars, they're generally not there. And if it's something, if it's a small area like this, and I know it's not going to affect the accuracy, the authenticity of the image, I go ahead and crop that out. So I'm gonna zoom in on that and get rid of these cars. Sometimes, it's not a perfect system. Sometimes it does wonky things. If it does, I'm just gonna crop around the image instead of trying to get these out. So I'll leave that one. So you can see there's a street. This is where the driveway ends, and there is a tree right there. So that's probably the most accurate one of that. So I'll leave it there. Now the yard is in a bit of a shadow. So what I'm going to do is create a radial gradient just around the back there to bring it out of the shadows just a little bit, add a little bit of brightness. And let's bring some of the shadows out. There we go. Make it pop a little more. Make the whole image more inviting. And we have the brightness. Just got before and after. Okay, ultimately the final photo may appear differently in different screens on different computers, whether it's a phone or whatnot. So make your edits the best you can, knowing that it may or may not look exactly as you have it on your own screen. So I'm just using the vertical tilt now here to straighten out that part there. All right, and the next one. The back was tough because it was full sun and I was struggling with the glare. So we're gonna try and get rid of some of the glare without impacting the house itself. So I just hit auto. It did a pretty good job. First thing I wanna do is, see how the top half of it is in shadow, the bottom is in bright light. So I'm gonna try and bring them closer together. So let's use a linear gradient that's fairly tight. Bring it out just a little bit. Let's bring out the shadows. That makes it too washed out. So let's see. Let's try the dehaze. Right now it just feels very hazy in that bright sun. So I'm just pulling up the haze a little bit to bring back the blacks, and then let's bring up the whites a bit. No, that's too much. See, it's affecting the sky. And then let's try the bottom. So what we can do in this mask here, I'm gonna duplicate and invert, and that will bring us the bottom part of it. So here, let's bring the brightness down a little bit. The shadows are okay. And bring down the highlights. So it's starting to create a more uniform image where the area that's in the sun isn't so overwhelmingly bright. So before, after, it's already starting to look a bit better. Now let's try and get rid of these flares from the lens. I did have a hood on my lens, so it comes with a hood like this. But sometimes in the bright sun, especially when you're shooting at a higher angle towards the house, cut the glare of the house. So the good thing is, as a lot of the glare is on the greenery and in the roof, which should be fairly easy to fix. So I'm gonna make the area just about the size of the flare, and then I'm gonna hit remove. All right, and it gives us options. It just fills in the greenery here. When you're doing touch-ups like this, especially on the house itself, be mindful of anything that's there that may be accidentally removed, because you don't want to do that. If there's a crack in the roof, or if there's some stains on the roof, you don't want to Photoshop those out. Those are part of the roof. So when a potential buyer shows up, they want to see the correlation between what they saw in a photo and what they see on the house. So if in the photo they look at a nice clean roof, but that's not actually there, you could get yourself with some bad comments from them. All right, so we have a lot of the glare out. So here's the before and after. So it's a little bit brighter. It represents the home a little bit better. The glares were definitely overpowering that. Cleaner, so it's a little more representative of what we want the buyer to look at. This one's actually pretty good. It has good contrast. And it's got some brightness to it. So it did a pretty good job. I may just add a little bit of a radial grain. This one doesn't show too well. It's there's still a lot of dirt around, so I'm not sure if they'll even upload it. Got some. Oh, that's why it looks weird. It merged the wrong images together. See, I didn't notice that as we were reviewing them in Pixelmob, but it looks like it merged the wrong images, which, boo-hoo, I wish I had noticed that before. So let's see if we go back to the raw, or let's see, what did I send to Pixelmob? All right, let's clean out. Let's look at 3 out of 10. Okay, so that was towards the end, and it was this image here. Wait, there's 2. Did it combine all 6? Because I don't see the other one. Oh, darn it. Oh, there's the other one. So it did do that one, but it looks like it combined the wrong ones here, because that's why we're seeing all this weird. Yes, see, this is the garage. Well, that's not cool, but we'll have to work with it for now. It took these images and these images and combined them into one. That hasn't happened before. Well, no, I take that back. It's happened in the past where it combined the wrong images. It's just silly how it did that. Okay, that's all right. In this case, what I'm gonna do, the RAS for those, and we're gonna do them ourselves. So we're gonna take these 3, we're gonna drop them into our collection, and we're gonna do them ourselves. So let's see how it does here. Okay, so it merged them, and actually the middle exposure was pretty close already because it didn't change it too much. it's an art, you know, and not everything is exact science to these photos, because, you know, at the end of the day too, everybody sees differently. Everybody sees hues differently. You may be looking at a photo and it looks to you a certain way, and then you show it to 10 people and the 10 people will see something completely different. So you just kind of want to find a nice balanced middle ground. All right, so we got that one. And then this is the front again. And then the last outdoor image is that. So let's see, what did we do here? We just created the mask. Let's copy the settings. Let's actually sync it with that one and the mask. We want to sync the mask in this case. All right, so we have the outside ones. Now we're gonna move into the interior. All right, the colors overall are pretty decent in this process. I just took the photos last night, so I still have a pretty clear visual of what it looked like. So I'm happy with that part, that I don't have to bring any of the colors back too much. So first thing I'm gonna do is fix that fishbowl effect. It just drives me crazy that it does that. But again, with a wide angle lens, it is sometimes hard to avoid. It doesn't recognize my Tokina lens in the Lightroom software, which is the one thing that is a little bit sad. And it doesn't fix it with the Canon profile. It actually makes things too bright. So that's why I'm not using the auto profile correction, because it's just not giving me the effect that I'm looking for. It's not accurate. So, all right, so uncheck that, go back to the manual. I'm gonna have to crop it a bit because it got the edges quite distorted, but I'm looking at the door frame. I want the door frame to be nice and straight. So what I'm gonna do is use the guided transform tool and get the door frame situated, and then work off of that, or the entry between the living room and the kitchen. So that's a little bit better. No, see, that distorted more. So this is pretty good. There's still a little bit of fisheye there. That's not horrible. The focus is on here. I'm okay with that. Ultimately, I don't want to see any fishbowl effect, but sometimes you just gotta work with what you got. Okay, I'm gonna leave the image as is because, like I said, the colors are pretty accurate. It's nice and clean. If I dehaze it a little bit, it just makes it too dark. Let's just do like 5 on the dehaze. So it may be hard to see the difference, but a lot of times you'll feel the difference when you're looking at the photo. So you may not realize exactly what it is about it, but the photo will feel either uncomfortable or it'll feel like you're actually looking at what you're supposed to be looking at. So that's kind of what I'm going for. A lot of times I'm going by feel. Does this feel like the space I was in? So let's add a little bit of the luminance, sharpening, just a little. The 40 usually works pretty well for me. And I think that's pretty good. So we're gonna sync these with the other photos. So as far as color correction, the Auto HDR did pretty well. I didn't have to change too much of that. So we're gonna sync these settings with the other indoor photos. I'm leaving transform unchecked, just like on the outside photos, but everything else is selected except for masking, and there's no masks so far in these. So we're good. Okay, so now let's go through and look them over. Oh, the one thing the realtor asked me to do, she did ask me to remove the second mat. This is the main mat, but there was another floor mat there. So we're just gonna remove it digitally. Things like that are fairly easy to do. And I'm always very clear, or I try to be clear with my client too, that there are certain things I can do easily. I can remove, you know, a little piece of rug like that from a decluttered area that it's obvious what it looks like, but I can't always remove furniture from a wall because I don't know what's behind that furniture. I don't know if there's outlets there. I don't know if there's cracks there. So at that point, now you're kind of playing with fire because you're manipulating something that you have no information about. All right, guys, I had to take a break because my phone camera died, my light died, and I was really hungry. So everything was running low on batteries, basically. All right, so back at it. It's not too bad, although I'm seeing, I don't like that. All right, that's something to look out for next time. I'm not sure why of all. What makes it hard to photograph a room well, especially not even if it's a small space or a large space, but what makes it harder to photograph it well is if there are things in the corners. So normally you want to get yourself up against the corner as far back as you can to get as much of the capture the space as best as possible. But sometimes the seller or the stager will place an armchair in a corner, or you'll have a bed right in a corner, or a lamp that you can't really maneuver around, and that forces you to work around that, and it makes it a little trickier to capture the space just the way you want it. Toilet seat down. You always want to make sure that toilet seats are down when taking photos of bathrooms. Nobody needs to be staring inside a toilet bowl. This is a very nice shower, and I had a good angle of it. Bathrooms tend to be small, but the way this bathroom is arranged made it a little bit easier to actually get a photo of the shower, which oftentimes is hidden somewhere behind the door. So I was happy about that. All right, so this is the primary bedroom upstairs. I'm just, overall it's not bad. I'm just fixing the fishbowl effect pretty much on all of them. I sound like a broken record on repeat. Fixing the fishbowl effect, fixing the fishbowl. All right, and then we have the outside. Okay, so that's all our photos. Okay, so let's export everything out. So select everything, export. These are yep, it's all set up. JPEGs. I do not resize the photos to fit. I leave them as is. That gives the client an option to use the full resolution, or when they export it out of their gallery, they have an option to scale it down either to 3000 pixels or a small web size. I always encourage them to use the full resolution though, so that all the photos look good. All right, so I'm gonna overwrite those because that was just 2 front of the house photos I saved out to send to the client, which she requested. All right. So we are done in Lightroom Classic. We went through the editing part. Everything looks pretty good. So now we're going to go back into Kubicasa and upload these photos to create a Kubicasa tour, a home tour.